Politicians and policymakers have vast amounts of data at their disposal, numbers that are used to create vital policies and programs. But is it the right data with the right interpretation? Joining us now to help answer that, in Vancouver, British Columbia, via Skype, David Eves. He's adjunct professor with the Centre for Digital Media. And with us here in studio, Philip Cross, research and editorial coordinator at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute and former chief economic analyst with StatsCan. Matthew Mendelson, director of the Mowat Centre. And Vivek Goel, president and CEO of Public Health Ontario. And it's good to have everybody around the table here. David, nice to see you again out on the left coast one more time. Earlier this month, as we know, the replacement for the mandatory long-form census was released. They call it the National Household Survey. And Philip, since this was your old stomping grounds that we're talking about here, tell us, in your view, the biggest difference between what we have now and what we replaced.
Right. Well, the first thing to correct is that this was not a replacement for the census. The census was split into two. One is a short-form census, which continues to be mandatory. What the National Household Survey is replacing is the long-form census. It used to be that 1 in 5 Canadians sampled had to return this. It was mandatory. This time around, we mailed it out to close to 50% of Canadians, but participation in the survey was voluntary.
And do you have any idea what the participation rate coming back in was?
I believe it was something like 68%, which is pretty much normal for a voluntary survey at StatsCan.
And of course, it replaced, I know you don't like the word replaced, but it did replace the long-form census,
That's right?
Even though we still have the short form, which presumably the participation rate was 100%, or close to anyway, was it?
Close to, yes.
Close to 100%. In which case, David, come on in here and tell us whether or not you think that this new survey adequately does what the long-form census part of the old survey did.
So I think the very clear answer to that is no, because it's actually not about what the percentage of people are who are responding, it's who's responding. And so the real concern with the kind of the new voluntary form is that there's certain communities, particularly marginalized communities, that don't traditionally have as strong a response rate. So once you want to kind of know more about where those communities are, what they're doing, how they're behaving, and how we can target policies to help them, we're going to be really hampered and not have the same level of information. And I think more frankly, not even know how little information we have.
Vivek, let me get your view on whether or not you think what we do now adequately replaces what we used to do.
I would agree with what David has just said. We certainly know from the data that were just released earlier this month that we have less data available across the country. There are communities for which StatsCan can't release the data because there weren't enough respondents. And we're waiting for the data at the smaller area level, where we're going to be looking to see, are there people that are less likely to be represented in this survey. The final piece is also that not only will there be some people who might have been less likely to respond, there's also going to probably be less response to some of the items in the survey. The way people design surveys is they put the most contentious items, for example, your income, towards the end of the survey. And so people stop responding when they see the contentious items. And so as we get more and more releases of the National Household Survey through the summer, we will actually get the true extent of that non-response.
Tell me if this is too colloquial, but you can sort of suck them in with some fairly neutral questions, but then when the rubber hits the road, problematic.
Yeah, you put the most sensitive questions to the end.
Gotcha. Okay, you're not here because you're a statistician, obviously. You're here because you run a think tank, and presumably you rely on good, clean information through which to develop policy, which you then pass on to, for example, the Ontario government. So how does all of this affect you?
Well, I agree with everything that's been said. This does represent a problem. We can use the word replace or not, but the issues of the information we have about a variety of different communities, particularly marginalized communities, how they're being affected, that we now know less about, and we don't know everything that we don't know. This to me is part of a broader trend, not just the federal government, but provincial governments, municipal governments. At a time when we need to get smarter about how we spend money and how we design policy, we're making decisions to get dumber. we're making decisions to have less reliable information. Right now, every government in the country is looking at how they're going to spend their program dollars, how they're going to target them more efficiently, which programs we're going to cut, which ones we're going to invest more in. And all of those require us to know which ones are working, which ones are having an impact, how they're impacting a variety of different communities. And right now, across the country in Canada, compared to elsewhere in the world, we're falling behind. We're just sort of making decisions by the seat of our pants, and we're starting to cut things like the census and the long-form census, the very tools that we need to make smart policy decisions.
Do you think that's right? We can't make smart policy decisions with this as opposed to what it replaced?
Well, we won't really know until the detailed low-level data is released in the fall. It's very hard it's only been a week. It's very hard to judge the quality of this data. But I think there's every reason to believe that because you don't have a random sample anymore, it won't be representative of the Canadian population as they mentioned.
In which case, is it any good?
In aggregate, probably yes. If we're looking for broad trends in society, but the whole point of a census is low-level neighborhood-type data, and it's going to be not very good at that level for a number of areas in Canada.
So let's confirm. You think this was a bad idea?
Yes.
And you said so at the time.
That's right.
Let's go out to British Columbia if I can. This, of course, is voluntary. That was one of the biggest differences the Conservative government federally made, was that it should be a voluntary household survey as opposed to a mandatory long-form census. Do you believe it should be mandatory, David, with, my recollection was, I'm not sure anybody ever did this, but my recollection was you could go to jail if you didn't fill it out.
Yeah, that was certainly the case in theory. I think there's two sides to this. The first is, should it be mandatory? I think we should have a discussion about that, but my sense is yes. I mean, there are certain things that as a society we say are responsibilities of citizens. You're supposed to do jury duty. We'd like you to vote. We don't make it mandatory. But I think actually making the census mandatory is actually not something that is completely wild, because it is the core data from which so many decisions are made based on spending. The flip side of this is the public is not going to magically disappear and say, we don't want these services that the government offers. They're going to want smart decisions being made by their government. So if we're not going to collect this data through a mandatory long-form census, at some point the government's going to decide it needs to get its hands on some data to make informed decisions. And there are much scarier ways by which the government might choose to acquire that data. So as even if you are a hardcore libertarian, as scared as you may be as a mandatory long-form census, where at least you now directly control the answers, there are much more concerning ways the government might choose to get this information.
Like what?
Well, so for example, right now there's an enormous quantity of data that's being collected, through your credit cards, through the websites that you visit, through sites like Facebook. And I think one of the things that we should be really frightened of is actually having our governments become dependent on those companies and those organizations to gather data and inform them about the public, because now they will actually have a vested interest in the business models of those organizations and will develop policies that would maybe not constrain them in ways that would be in the public interest, because they need information from them now. And so I think we want to be really careful about the kind of ecosystem of data collection we're creating and what government's role is in that ecosystem.
Go ahead, Matthew, you wanted to add.
I mean, David has said there's some frightening aspects to this, but there are also big opportunities, and I think he would agree with that. I mean, part of my concern with how we treated the long-form census was, quite honestly, it was a political decision. It wasn't a policy decision. And we didn't have, I'm not necessarily wedded to a mandatory long-form census and some kind of deep religious commitment, but we didn't have a discussion about why we're going to eliminate it and what the impacts would be. I think beforehand we say, what data do we need? What data do we need to make certain kinds of policy decisions, to make program evaluations? And then we can design the census that way. But likewise, the private sector, the big data that's coming out, all of these other kinds of internet data that David is talking about, how we integrate that with data that the government is also collecting, I mean, that does create opportunities for better measurement of outcomes. Which homeless shelters are doing better? Which ones are worse? Which are actually getting people into full-time jobs, into full-time housing? What techniques are they using? What kinds of neighborhoods are they living in? And you can start to target program dollars, and you can start to make program and policy decisions to say, these are really good programs that are working and give good value for money. I mean, that's what taxpayers want. These are working and dealing with the problems we're trying to deal with, and these ones aren't. So you can redirect resources. So yes, David David is right, and I think he agrees with this. There are risks here in terms of privacy and all kinds of things like that. But GPS data, all of this data that is now being collected, creates more opportunities for governments, if they're smart, to do a better job assessing the policy and programs that they're delivering.
But let me go to the premise underneath that answer and underneath David's answer previously, and Vivek, let me put it to you, which is that government in the future will make policy on the basis of the most amount of information, good information, that they can get. And therefore, they're going to need this information, and we'll go find it somewhere, if not this way, then another way. And David talked about some more nefarious ways to get it, which he obviously would find objectionable. Do you believe that premise?
I think the key word that you said there was good amount of data. And I think it's worth thinking about. There's three kinds of data we've talked about already. Census data collected in a mandatory way, survey data that's voluntary, and let's call everything else big data, and we can come back and talk about what that means. But data that's available for other purposes that we can repurpose for our policy needs. Now, as Philip said, the census still exists. And one of the options is some items could be moved to a mandatory census. So the conversation we really need to have is, what is it that we need for our policy purposes, like what Matthew was describing? What can we only get from a mandatory census? What can be received out of surveys? And we do all sorts of other surveys through StatsCan and other means. And what is now going to become available through these sorts of other secondary sources like big data? And we would have to address the privacy and other issues around that. At the root of it, though, even to work with big data, and I've worked with administrative data and health services for many years, you still rely on census types of data to validate what you have. If I want to study the patterns of healthcare utilization in vulnerable populations, the people that don't use health services, that's not in my big data because they haven't used the services. I can compare the people that use health services with the general population using census data and start to make some policy recommendations about what's missing, who's not getting services. So it's being able to combine across these different types of data that we can actually add value to the big data.
Philip, a follow-up?
Yeah, I think there's a very good example in recent experience about the difference between census or rigorous random data and data that's voluntary. And that's the BC election. I think it's well known that everybody got that one wrong. But the ones that were worse were the internet surveys where you allowed people to self-select instead of going out and get a random survey. Those were particularly poor in predicting the outcome. But that's a very vivid recent example of what happens when you work with bad data.
Okay, you talked about census data, you talked about survey data, and then there's big data. And that's the one that we want to follow up on right now. And to do that, we want to invite somebody else to join our gathering here. There are other ways to get information similar to what's contained in a census, and that's thanks to the vast amounts of data we now have. Is it data or data? What do you got? You're StatsCan guy. Is it data or data?
Data.
It's data.
They have a team working on that, actually.
Okay, data's the guy in Star Trek, data's the guy that we're talking about now. Two, give us, moving along, a better sense of how the private sector is using big data and how these methods could be applied to the public sector. We're going to welcome Kenneth Cukier. He is joining us via Skype from London, UK. He is the data editor at The Economist and co-author of Big Data, A Revolution That Will Transform How We Live, Work, and Think. And Kenneth, as we welcome you to our program over here in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, why don't we just start with a definition of big data, since I suspect not everybody knows what we're talking about. Go ahead.
Well, I'm sorry to tell you this, but just like you can say data or data, so too big data has a woolly definition and probably doesn't have one at all. In the same way that it's hard to define the web because it's always changing, the cloud computing is not just in the cloud. There's no concrete definition for big data, but it does refer to something, and what it refers to is the fact that the world has a lot more data than ever before, and we can do great new things with it, because what we're finding is there's things that we can do when we have a vast body of data that we simply could not do when we had smaller amounts. What we see is that when we have more data because we're collecting more about things that we always collected data on, but we also have more because we're rendering things that were always informational, but that we never put into a data format before, and we're putting it into data, treating it like data so we can process it. That's the first thing. So that's just more. And then there's also messy. That's the idea that although we have a lot more data, we also increase the messiness of the data. It's not very clean, but it's a worthwhile trade-off that we can use more data, even if it's messier, it's not as clean, because we can get more interesting findings and we can unearth interesting insights from it.
Kenneth, given that we are awash in data today in a way that we've never been before in the history of the world, what is it that you suggested we can do now that we couldn't do before?
Well, there's a technique called machine learning. And so what that does is it takes a vast amount of data and it changes the nature of different problems from trying to learn something or teach a computer to do things to turning it into a math problem. So an example is a self-driving car. How does one think that we could get a car to drive itself? Are we any better at enshrining all the rules of driving into software code? No. Is it because we've got faster processors? No. Cheaper storage? No. It's because we've transformed the problem into a data problem, into one of maths. We collect as much data as possible about the surroundings of the car and everything around it, and then we just make probabilities that this is a traffic light, that the traffic light is green and not red, that that's a car and that the car will pass us. No, it's swerving into our lane. We need to react by slowing down or swerving in a different direction. And by doing that, processing vast amount of information, vast amounts of data, we're able to create self-driving cars. We've got now voice recognition on our telephones. We have translation systems by Google online that work. And there's a myriad of other things. Soon our doctors will be consulting a computer to prescribe to diagnose us and give us a prescription of the treatment based on what big data says, not just on his thinking alone, in the same way that Amazon book recommendations far exceed the ability of any one bookseller, or in fact all of the booksellers and humans in aggregate, to know what you want to read next.
Let me pick up on that healthcare example that you just gave, and we'll follow up there, and then Vivek, I'll go to you on this as well, since you're in healthcare, obviously. In your book, Ken, you outline some of the ways that big data is used in the private sector, but I wonder how people who are the policymakers in the public sector can take that information and apply it to what they do, for example, in healthcare. You gave the example of the doctor. Give me another one, if you would.
Yeah, sure. So there's a great example right here from in Britain with the National Health Service. What they did is they took a lot of their data on prescriptions. It was anonymous data, so we had no personal information, identifying information in it, and they gave it to the outside because it was part of the Open Government, Open Data Initiative. And a group of hackers, these are the good guys, in London took the information and they correlated it versus in terms of the prescription for statins to lower blood cholesterol and where in the regions of England different clinics were making these prescriptions. And what they found was that there was a wide diversity. In some instances, as much as 36% of those prescriptions for statins were expensive on-brand, patented statins, while in other areas it's as low as 4%. Now, there's no medical difference between a statin that's on-brand, patented and expensive versus one that's generic and inexpensive, does the same thing, but it was just a weird particularity of the prescriptions that were going on. The NHS didn't know this before. It took a bunch of outsiders to take their data and process it this way and map it, know what to look for, have an insight, and through trial and error uncover this. But by doing this, the Exchequer is able to save hundreds of millions of pounds. And
alienate Big Pharma in the process, though, no?
Well, Big Pharma can earn its money in lots of ways as well. They enjoyed their patent protection for the statins for a while. Now let the generics come in and offer more statins to more people.
Okay, gotcha. All right, Vivek, let me bring you in now. You run Public Health Ontario.
Yeah.
Just in 20 seconds, tell me what you guys do.
We look out for diseases that are coming into the country or that are already here and try to track the patterns. And so just to give an example, obviously everyone's read about Google Analytics and Google Flu Watch. It's an example of the potential of big data out there from internet searches to look for who's searching for flu or who's searching for any kind of disease, and you can actually, again, localize it to regions. But I would like to say that we've actually been working with big data for many years, and it is something that has an amorphous definition. We've been doing the kinds of studies that were just described here in Ontario using data at the Institute for Clinical Evaluative Sciences, drug utilization data, physician service data,
What do you want to know?
What do you want to know? And we could look at the patterns.
No, that's what I'm asking. You get this information coming in, and what kinds of things do you want to know from it?
We might want to know, again, as we were talking about earlier, who's using services, who's not. Are there differences across regions? And as was just in the example, we can relate differences in utilization of services to supply of services. Surgical procedures related to the supply of surgical space in a particular region, and look at the outcomes. So we have been working with big data. What is changing is the volume of data that's available and our processing power to work with it. and the immense number of additional sources like internet searches, GPS data on location, so we can follow people around. So we have more data to work with, but we have actually been doing these sorts of things for many years.
Let me ask David Eves whether he has any concerns, for example, to get information by Google searches. Do you have any concerns about big data being accumulated that way?
So I think for me, it's not a question of like, do I have concerns? Don't I have concerns? I mean, I am concerned, but I think there's also a huge opportunity here as well. What I really think we need to have is a public discussion about what is getting collected and what do we want the government to have access to and how do we want them to use data? Because if a private sector actor is using data, usually you've signed some form of consent, whether you really had a choice or not. If you wanted to use Amazon books or not, I guess you could go use somebody else, but you're kind of consenting for them to generate and use your data. What I think gets people much more nervous is when the government has access to data. So what they're worried about is, well, if the Department of Health knows that I have certain problems and then the police want to investigate me, do they have access to that health data, which might help them tailor their investigation to go target something that they might otherwise know? And that's what starts to get people very nervous. And so there's huge opportunity for government savings, for more effective services, and I think there are real privacy issues. And at the end of the day, the state has a monopoly on violence. And that makes people very nervous about what it's going to do with the data it has and its ability to kind of snoop into your life. So these are the kind of conversations, before we get too excited about the opportunities of big data, we need to be having now.
What do you mean the state has the monopoly on violence? I've been to some hockey games where that's just not the case. But anyway, I think I know what you mean.
I don't have my own personal enforcer.
Okay, I get you. Matthew, you wanted to add.
So there's a lot of data in the health space, and we've been talking a lot about that. And to me, it's about compiling these and bringing various things together. I don't want to talk about e-health, but governments are challenged because they are trying to make big investments in data collection, in digitization, in electronic records of various kinds. And it's going to take a while before we get to a state where we understand fully how we can use it and how we can really get the best public benefit. I mean, in the health space, I remember data around C-sections in hospitals or in regions, and some hospitals in Ontario and some regions are doing more C-sections than others with no necessarily clinical basis. So what's the culture of that place? Why is it? Are they getting better outcomes, worse outcomes? What's the cost associated with that? But that requires connecting individual patient data and hospital data and all kinds of data. And it's not just health. So I think most people, as Ontario has invested in smart meters, we have a good understanding of electricity rates and conservation. I think people would appreciate knowing, okay, so if we're using electricity at this time, that can be cheaper, and then there are ways for the government to nudge people into using energy at different times. We can conserve energy, it can be cheaper, we can use more green energy. All of that requires access to the smart meter data. I think there are some privacy concerns, I bet, but I bet most people would say, yeah, I don't really care if anonymous data about when I'm using electricity and when I'm not gets plugged in. Although, there may be some people who grow marijuana in their basement who may have privacy concerns. So there would be some people, but I think this is part of the conversation we're having. And from my perspective, anonymous data that gets plugged into energy electricity modeling to increase green energy use, to bring down the cost, to increase conservation, most people would say, yeah, that's fine and we should be doing that.
When you were at StatsCan, how much time did you guys spend worrying about whether or not you were intruding too much into people's privacy through the collection of all of this information?
Enormously in all areas except the one that it turned out counted, which was the census. There were complaints, and that was the government's rationale for cutting the census, was its intrusion into privacy. We were not sensitive to that. We did not, there were some questions that I think even now former chief statisticians recognize they didn't have to be in the census.
Like what?
The number of bathrooms in your house, that type of thing.
Too intrusive.
Yeah, and I don't think there was enough peeling back, do we need all these 65 questions? Let's just focus on the ones that count. Because as was noted, the further down you go, the more and more sensitive these become. Did we need to ask about income, given we have income tax data, for example, that type of thing?
Kenneth, is this one of the problems with this effort to get big data, is that you can overreach? And obviously you depend on the goodwill and the participation of the public to make this thing work. Is that a danger here?
You know, it's a big danger to overreach in this way, and I think it's a tragedy that, in fact, Stats Canada, or that Canada right now is thinking about these things of what they could have done to retain the census, because more information is going to be better than less information, almost as an axiom in the big data world. So the fact that you've lost this mandatory long-form census does seem a pity. I don't know. I'm sure that there's good reasons for why you're doing it, but to hear that it was privacy was the reason, and that you could have had a much less invasive or more modest technique to remedy that, which is scale back the questions rather than cut the long-form census altogether, seems a pity that those lesser, more modest tweaks weren't examined so that you could collect more data. The point here is a bigger point, which is that data is almost like a new infrastructure, and the role of the state that David pointed out, he was using Max Weber, the sociologist's great formulation, saying that he defines the state as the legitimate use of force, right? Or violence, if you will, the legitimate use. So too, the state in the 21st century has a real interest in collecting information and making it available to the people, because it's a new form of public infrastructure. Data as infrastructure, we can do great things with it. In the United States, they use the weather data, both in the private sector and the public sector, to do a myriad of things. And in fact, the GPS is another good example of the US government making data available to the world as almost a global public good. And so for the people of Canada, you could see that it's not really about, we can tap into big data from alternative sources like Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn to learn things. We can, as David pointed out, use credit card data and banking data or income tax data to learn income. But it's a real great benefit to have, self-reported data on income as well, particularly because people lie, right? And you can learn something about your culture by noticing anomalies like this. It doesn't have to be totally clean and fit into a row and make sense for us to learn from things. We can learn from the deviations as well.
But let's remember, this was 2 or 3 years ago that the Conservative government decided to get rid of the long-form census. I think, was it that long ago? I think it was. Yeah, something like that. How many people complained about having to fill out mandatorily a long-form census?
Certainly less than 100.
Fewer than 100 in a country of 36 million people.
They were not storming the barricades about this issue, no.
And we changed the policy anyway.
That's right. Which leads you to believe there may have been another reason they changed this policy.
And that was?
I'll let you raised it, you speculate.
Can we just come back to privacy for 1 minute?
I'm not surprised you want to punt that one. Yeah, go ahead.
But
go ahead.
In terms of privacy, everyone that works with data of any kind spends a lot of effort on privacy issues. And in this country, certainly, we have built up a very robust privacy regime around all of the data that we use, and in particular in the health space with protection of health information. We have principles that guide our use. We enter into data sharing agreements when we exchange data that govern what people can and cannot do with that data. We run all the projects through ethics review processes to ensure that there is a social good, so that whatever we're going to be looking at with people's personal information, it's going to benefit a social good. So we have a very robust system of ensuring that we're doing the right things. We also do research on Canadians' attitudes around this sort of issue, and so I'll circle back. I want to go back to a point that was raised earlier. In fact, with respect to health data, Canadians very much want to see their health data used to improve the services that they receive. It's been shown in survey after survey, and response rates varying, of course.
So they're not hung up on the privacy if they think they'll get better services.
It's being used for improving the quality of services. It's being used for population health, to look out for emerging diseases and so on. What they do get concerned about, and I go back to the private sector and the drug company example, they are concerned that their personal information will be sold by governments. They don't want to see their data used for profit-making purposes. There's a higher level of concern amongst Canadians about use for unrelated research purposes. And so my point is that we do need to do research on Canadians' attitudes, both towards use of big data, towards surveys, and towards the census. And I would agree that the case studies of the individuals that might have written to their members of parliament complaining about the long-form census was really not sufficient to base that policy decision around whether we continue with it or not. I honestly can't say what the root of it was. At one point, there were considerations that it was a cost-saving measure, but in fact, as we actually look at it, the National Household Survey was more expensive because you actually had to administer it to more people to get that response rate.
I'm looking for somebody around this literal and metaphorical table who won't be afraid of the politics of this to tell us why it got changed. I mean, it was Matthew, are you that guy? It was ideological, right?
Am I someone who's honest, who will speak truth? Yes. I have no idea, though. And I do think that the federal government, when they made that decision, were not aware sufficiently of the backlash that was going to happen and the criticism that they would take, and they kind of got locked in to their decision and didn't want to back down. I think there is a sense that data, the census data in particular, a lot of that is used by the not-for-profit sector, the charitable sector, the social services sector, and those data are used to criticize the federal government, or those results are used to criticize federal policies, and that mostly these data are used by academics and researchers, and it's plausible the federal government didn't consider these to be important constituencies for them. I mean, I look at my time in government, and when we were talking about introducing the Ontario Child Benefit, which was a new initiative to help poor kids, a lot of the discussion around that relied on some of the long-form census data to assess how the size of families, geographic distribution, income, to really do an assessment, which was my job as a public servant, to do an assessment of how much this would cost.
So could you do that? Could you do that same work today? Because the information would be just as accurate and just as reliable?
It might be a little bit. It might be a little bit more difficult, and there will be a whole series of areas now where governments often get it wrong. Public servants, they do assessments of how much something is going to cost, and they don't get it exactly right. But their job is to do it as best as they can with the best data they can. And so, the better the data, the more accurate their projections are going to be, the more accurate their assessment of how much this will cost and what its impact will be. And yes, at a real level, for people making real decisions, the loss of the long-form census affects their ability to do that.
Philip.
I won't speculate on what was their motivation. What I did find interesting, though, was this was, I think most people have forgotten in this debate, this was the second time census was canceled. The 1986 was canceled by the then Mulroney government. What was quite different this time around compared to 86, though, was the reaction of the business community. We had the usual suspects. Municipal government academics were outraged. What made a difference in 86, though, was that the big retailers, the big corporations, needed this data. This time around, the big firms were silent.
How come?
Because they had found other data sources, particularly their big data sources, which actually gave them probably better market research on their customers because they could tailor it to an individual level. You can now monitor, you can show an advertisement during a sporting event and tell how many of those people went to your restaurant in the next week.
Well, let me try this with Kenneth then. Is it not then perhaps as big a loss as some people thought that we don't have the long-form census anymore because private business has figured out other ways to get this information after all?
Well, that's true, and it's great. So if you're Walmart, real example, Walmart hires its own meteorologists because the weather really matters. If you optimize your products based on the weather patterns, you can sell a lot more and have better inventory management. That's all very simple. But if you're the National Weather Service and you have fewer meteorologists and so your predictions aren't as good, planes will crash, right? So if that's great if Walmart wants to license its data to the US government and then the US government make it available to others, but that's just not the world we're in. So the loss of the census data might not hurt retailers who have alternate ways to get this information. But for the government who needs to make this information, policymakers, or for other people, other retailers that can't avail themselves of having their own meteorologists or great brand advertising feedback loops because they hired expensive consultants to help them with that, then it's a loss. And also, the other thing is we don't know what's going to be important today that we will want to use tomorrow. So it's kind of just a net loss anyway by not having as much information as possible.
Gotcha. David Eves, let me get you back into this discussion here and focus on the following. We've talked about the effect of big data on healthcare, just now on aviation, on retailing. How about immigration policy? Can you help us see any potential links there?
So I want to step back because I want to say I think this really was a political decision. It came out of PMO. It's quite clear. And there's an entire kind of literature on the right in the United States which is trying to get rid of the long form there as well. And so this is a belief that actually if you collect more information, then government can do less. And I think that was actually a big part of what was driving this decision. And I think it's important that I enter the debate, and I'm surprised that nobody else actually wants to kind of acknowledge that there's some real politics, because one of the things, whether it's about immigration or about health, is if data is going to matter more, if they're going to enter a world of big data, it means data is going to become political. We're going to be able to know more about people. We're going to be able to know more about how our society is working, which means that information, how we collect it, the way we collect it, what we choose to collect, all of this is going to inform political debates in a way that it didn't before. So one of the reasons I want to have a conversation about data is because this stuff is all about to become very, very political, and we need to be figuring out what are the processes we want to have in place by which we're going to choose what to collect and how we're going to use it, even more so than we already have, and with a much broader lens than just privacy.
I think, in fairness, that's what I hinted at when I said it was for ideological reasons, but you just said it way better and with much more detail than I did or could, frankly. So, moving on now to immigration. What about that?
Well, so I think on the immigration front, one of the big challenges, Canada is an immigration society. We accept a huge number of people, and how those people integrate, how quickly they integrate, how effectively they're able to find jobs, those are enormous policy questions that have very real impacts on society, not just for those individuals, but for our GDP. I mean, how many times have I gotten into a taxi and met someone who, had a very highly specialized skill, or, was a tradesperson, and instead they're driving a taxi because they weren't able to find work, they didn't end up in the right community, or they weren't able to take the right course. I mean, here is an enormous opportunity by which, data could help us design policies more effectively. And I think what we really need is not kind of the sledgehammer policies of the 19th and the 20th century, where we rolled out, cookie cutter programs that were going to work for everybody. The opportunity with data is for scalpel-like programs where we can actually really target small communities and help them in really profound ways. And I think immigration is a wonderful example where we're accepting a large number of people, and they're not always ending up in the places where they could be or landing in the way that we'd like. So there's a big data opportunity there.
It's really useful to think about the difference between the private sector and the public sector here. I mean, the example of Walmart, looking at the weather and saying, I don't know what they do with that, but then they put more umbrellas.
They hired their own meteorologist?
I did not know that.
Either.
But they put more umbrellas and more rubber boots or more sunscreen. And that makes perfect sense. Of course they should do that. In the public sector, we have not traditionally invested in assessing which programs are working, which programs aren't. And so David talks about scalpel-like interventions in immigration. So a variety of different programs, public sector, private sector, not-for-profit, trying to help immigrants do better in the job market. Some are working really well. Some are working well with certain kinds of communities. Young people are from certain kinds of ethnocultural backgrounds. Others aren't working so well. Do we have a good sense of which those are and which those aren't? No. And I don't mean to overstate this, but I'll do it for rhetorical purposes. We should have access, as long as it's anonymized and privatized, the kind of program outcome that Walmart would have. So we could say, this program is really working well with newcomers coming from this country with backgrounds in sciences, and it's really helping them integrate well. So we're going to put more resources into that. That, to me, is exactly what we should be doing in the public sector.
Can I just understand this? You want access to that information by compelling private sector people who collect it to give it to the public sector?
No, not necessarily. I'm saying that the public sector has to do a much better job in early on in program design, building in measures of success, clear definitions of what they're trying to achieve, objectives, and figuring out which ones are working, which ones aren't working, and reporting that in a very transparent public way. Say, you know what, this program isn't working, and we're shutting it down.
Finding out that information themselves, though, is what
Correct.
you mean. I see. Okay.
But sometimes you can integrate it with other data that's out there.
Okay.
Can I just counter this point that business doesn't need the census or the long-form data?
You think they do?
I think they do. I think it's great that Walmart can do what it does, and I think an example in the book is that they also figured out that people buy more Pop-Tarts when a hurricane is coming, and so they put the Pop-Tarts in the front of the store.
Makes sense. Yep.
So it's great sorts of things that they can do with big data to help with marketing or real-time marketing as people are walking by the store with GPS. But they have to make the decision about where to situate a store. They still need census data. And that's why my colleague Jan Kessel, in the op-ed that we wrote, talked about all the business uses for the long-form census data. And I think if you go back, you had the Council of Business Economists, who are the economists working for all the large banks, were talking about why they need that data. You can actually go back and find many people in the business community that were speaking to the need for the data, and I think we would find just as many users in the private sector as there are in the public sector.
Philip, what's your view on whether or not the private sector can get basically almost all the information it needs its own way and doesn't require any help from StatsCan or other agencies like that.
Well, I didn't say the private sector. I said large firms. It's notable that the Canadian Federation of Independent Businesses that represent small businesses, they were a big supporter of Census. It's big firms that can collect this big data and have the computational power to do something with it. Small firms, it's a different story.
Kenneth, what do you call the equivalent of Statistics Canada in the UK?
Well, we call it the probably the National Census Bureau, or National Census Office.
And have you had this kind of debate over there about what you're allowed to find out and what you're not, and how you find it out and how you don't?
Not yet, but I'm sure it's going to come. Keep in mind that there's the National Census Bureau has hundreds of censuses hundreds of surveys per year on lots of different things, and those are just sort of randomized surveys. And then they do the decimal every 10-year census, and so there it goes to all Americans to fill out. So there, what we have is, if you will, a long form as well as multiple short forms throughout the years.
I want Matthew to bring you in at this point to have you speak to the baseball manager's view of public policy. What do I mean by that? There are baseball managers who've seen thousands of games, and they don't care what the computer projections say, and they don't care what the big data says about what this batter will do in this circumstance with 2 men on and 1 man out in the bottom of the 7th. They have a gut feel about what will work in that circumstance. Are there policymakers like that anymore, or are we just utterly reliant on the big data to make policy decisions now?
Well, it depends what we mean by policymaker. There's certainly politicians who are like that, and that's their job. I mean, politicians at the end of the day, many will use a lot of data and evidence, some will use less, some will look at their constituency and their supporters, and that's perfectly reasonable. From my perspective, in our political system, at the end of the day, political leaders decide. And political leaders have to make that judgment. But one of the things that has to go into it, some will use it more, some will use it less, is really reliable evidence and data about what's working and what's not working. And I would say that at some point, if one found that certain kinds of corrections programs were working better, we're decreasing recidivism rates. I think we have a pretty good sense of that. There will still be political leaders who say, for other reasons, well, we lock people up and we treat them harshly and we keep them in there for a long time, even if when we let them out, they're more likely to reoffend, because they're doing it for a different reason. They're doing it because of a sense of justice or a sense of punishment, and there are all kinds of reasons to do it.
Sells well at the voting booth?
Maybe, certainly, but that's because that reflects certain community values. But it's useful to say, okay, we're doing it for that reason. Let's not pretend we're doing it because it's going to bring down recidivism rates. If we want to bring down recidivism rates, here's how to do it. These are the programs that work. And then you can make that judgment. I think that policymakers in the public service, they should be very driven by data and evidence and objectives and measurements. And increasingly, they're not, because they don't have access to it.
Do you have more respect, Vivek, for the politician who makes the gut decision on which way to go, or one who is utterly kind of in lockstep with where the big data tells you should go?
I have the most respect for the politician that works the way Matthew just described. If they have a gut feeling about something, that they recognize what the evidence is, and they say, I'm not going to do what the evidence recommends, I'm going to do this because I believe this is what is right. I don't think that politicians who say they're doing something, ignoring the evidence, and then say it's based on evidence, are acting in good faith with the population.
Gotcha.
So they've got to explain, if they're not going to follow that evidence, they've got to explain why they're not doing it.
Philip?
That's the big risk in all this, is in a world of big data and growing data sources, that people think of data as a substitute for decision making. It can never be. I remember my boss telling me how she was testifying to a parliamentary committee about infrastructure. And she was talking about the data we could supply and so on and so forth. And they kept saying, where do we build? What should we do with the money? That's your decision. Don't ask data producers to produce that. And that's the real risk in all this, is humans, particularly when it comes to data, are naturally lazy. And there's a real risk that we'll just turn off our brains and say, well, we'll let the data speak for itself. It never speaks for itself. It takes a careful analyst to extract the meaning from the data and make the right decision.
Good judgment at the end of the day still matters.
Absolutely.
Gotcha. All right. With a few minutes to go, let's put this quote up and we'll discuss this as we head to the home stretch here. Here's what Michael Milakovic, professor at the University of Miami, had to say about the potential for data mining and government at a conference. This was last July. He said governments apply data mining technology in multiple arenas, from education to tax collection, in order to plan, implement, and evaluate policies designed to meet the needs of particular subsets of the population. These may include disabled school children in need of special instruction, or elderly citizens requiring more intensive health care. The quality of planning and decision-making in all these areas are dependent on the collection, analysis, and interpretation of accurate, objective data, making it possible to spot trends and optimize processes. Okay, Kenneth, let's go to you on this one. Are there instances for which data mining gets us better information for policymaking as opposed to worse information for policymaking?
Data mining, well, it's what Philip said. I mean, data mining is a technique. Data mining can give us information, and then we have to make decisions based on it. It depends on what your question is. If you're looking for, as we talked about earlier in the program, marginalized communities, probably don't go to data mining. That might be difficult. You might need reported data from a survey or from a census. But if you want to do certain techniques where the data is available, so for example, learn just blunt classic demographic data, you could probably go to a mobile phone carrier and get information on what's popular on a Friday night to learn if you need to build new roads or not, or the sort of commutes that people have on weekdays based on the mobile phone data, rather than having to use other techniques that are more cumbersome to do. So it depends on what your question is, and then it depends on the wisdom of the people in terms of how they put that information to use.
David Eves, would you weigh in on that?
Yeah, I think there's two things about this that I think immediately strike me as there's definitely huge opportunities around data mining for public policy, and I think it has two implications. The first is I get very nervous. I think the real lesson of the long-form census is that politicians actually understand data, and they're actually quite keen to destroy data that might run counter to theses they have or policies they want to implement. So data is now very, very political, and politicians are savvy to this and understand that if they can control what data gets created, they could then potentially control future debates. So we need to start talking about that. The second thing that I would say is I'm very nervous. The wonderful examples of Walmart and all these places where we're using big data, I'm very nervous about a growing gap between the capacity of government versus the capacity of the private sector. I mean, for a growing number of people, they go to Amazon and they get these amazing recommendations, and it's like magic to them. And they do not have an experience that's anything remotely like that when they're dealing with the public service at the moment. The ability of the public service to offer that kind of degree of service to them just does not exist. And if that gap continues to grow and grow, I fear about the confidence people are going to have in government. And that's why we need to be having these conversations today so we can start ramping this stuff up and start thinking about how it's going to impact programs tomorrow.
David is exactly right. And there's nothing other than good planning and money that is preventing government from, when you go and renew your driver's license, them popping up and saying, oh, by the way, your 6-year-old kid, they're due for their immunization, or their birth certificate needs to be renewed, or whatever the situation is, much like Amazon. But we don't do that.
Should we do that?
Of course we should. 100%. We have to connect all of these sources of data that the public sector have. Protecting privacy. Privacy, to me, is, to some extent, a red herring. Of course, it's a concern, but it's a concern we can deal with. It's like saying, well, we shouldn't build roads because there might be traffic accidents. No, we can deal with those and manage those, and we put in speed limits and we do things. Privacy is a real concern, but we can manage it. We have all of these data sets, and there's no reason when you go online to renew your birth certificate or whatever it is, that you shouldn't have an experience like your online banking, where you've got all kinds of different accounts there and you can move your money around easily.
Except that some people are suspicious about the government knowing too much about them. But the
government already does know that about
them. They know it,
but
you don't want to be reminded of it all the time, that they know all this about you.
Well, David keeps saying we need to have a conversation about it, and we are, but I think the far bigger concern is that year after year you will have experiences when you go to Walmart and they suggest, why don't you buy this product, you need it, and you go, yeah, I do, or Amazon, or your bank, where you seamlessly move money back and forth between your checking account and your savings account.
We hold governments to different standards, different and higher standards.
And I think, though, that if we continue to do that, I share David's concern that people will say, why do I have to go so many times, and does it take so long, and why can't government be efficient and nimble?
I got 30 seconds left.
Matthew's example is about service delivery, which we should be focusing in on, and people can opt into that. You can opt in to get your immunization records or your child's immunization record checked when you're going for your driver's license. But going back to data for policy making, we do have to be able to combine across all sorts of different things with census type of data to make informed policy decisions.
Gotcha. I want to thank everybody for their participation on the program today. Kenneth Cukier, it's good of you to join us on the line from London, UK via Skype. Your book, Big Data, A Revolution That Will Transform How We Live, Work and Think. Thanks for joining us there from London. And David Eves, the adjunct professor at the Centre for Digital Media in Vancouver, BC, also via Skype. We thank you for participating as well, David. And here in the studio, Philip Cross from the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, Matthew Mendelson, the director of the Mowat Centre, Vivek Goel, President, CEO of Public Health Ontario.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.